Hi, I'm Kathleen Murphy, and welcome to Murf+E Unfiltered Zero BS Biz Talk. Today I'm here with a new co-host who's filling in for Elliot Grossman. His name is Maxwell Shinnick, and Maxwell is my oldest son. How are you today, Max?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. This is fun. This has been something that I've wanted to do for a long time, so I was glad that you were able to join us today.
Yeah, happy to be a part.
Thank you. Now, the reason specifically that you're here today also is because this particular topic really wouldn't have been appropriate for Elliot, because today's topic is on reverse mentoring. And for those that don't understand what reverse mentoring is all about, it has to do with having somebody who would be decades younger than yourself mentor you, and vice versa. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to talk about some tips that people can apply. We're going to talk about how you go about finding a reverse mentor. And we're also going to talk about our experiences collectively in terms of what it's been like to each have the experience of reverse mentoring. But before we dig into that, I'm going to read the overview for this particular story. And it goes like this. In reverse has its advantages, and one of them is applying the knowledge and experience from a younger person to your vault of decades of experience. How do you find a reverse mentor, and what are some of the advantages of this less often applied strategy? So when I first thought about this concept, it was something that I had a hard time actually wrapping my brain around a little bit, because I'm used to the traditional mentoring, which is finding somebody older than myself, not necessarily somebody younger than myself, to reach out to do some reverse mentoring with. So that was something that, from a challenge perspective, I personally had to grasp in my mind as something that I wanted to go forward with. The thing that I realized is that there are unlimited possibilities in terms of when you do have a reverse mentor, and we're going to talk about this, and you're going to be able to share some of the experiences that you've had and that I've had as well with our audience. And one of the things that's so great is that when you have alignment with your mentor, the exchange for the information just can be incredible. It's unlimited in terms of what you might expect. You can cover it from a topic perspective, so that's something that I want to make sure that we emphasize. And then the thing that I also like best is the fact that having a reverse mentor gives you a very unique perspective and a different lens through which to see challenges or opportunities through, which you wouldn't normally be able to do if in fact it was you being the mentor, being mentored by somebody else that's probably more in the decade of perhaps your age that you are. So Max, I'm going to ask you some questions as it relates to this topic, and it's going to be fun to hear you tell us your story as it relates to this. So had you ever heard of the concept of reverse mentoring before we started talking about it?
I honestly hadn't, no.
So it was a new concept for you. Were you surprised to be reverse mentoring someone when you had been approached by someone that asked you to do that?
I had. It was something I hadn't really thought of as a concept, but in application, it's something that kind of happened without me actually realizing that it occurred. And looking back on it, actually had the experience. So
it was kind of an organic process, you
Absolutely,
might say.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that you set out and planned, in other words, and it went well. So tell me a little bit about your first encounter with reverse mentoring. How did that go?
So one of the first instances of reverse mentoring in my own experience was actually teaching my grandparents how to use Venmo to pay for, I believe it was a coffee, and they hadn't heard of it, as a concept, and it kind of opened their eyes to the possibilities of monetary exchange, between in a more social setting versus transactional in a corporate setting.
Right, and especially because we're in the era of COVID right now, it was incredibly important for them to know that there was some other way to exchange money with you using a system like that.
Yeah.
So that's a brilliant example. And then how would you rate and value the experience of the reverse mentoring concept?
I would say it's pretty valuable, just in the fact that any type of teaching experience like that, when you're really applying it, you're not really realizing what you know and don't know at the time. So
Sure.
It's a good way to self-teach as well, and kind of reflect on how much you actually know about the topic versus how much you don't know.
Sure. So I'm going to respond to the questions that I asked you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the fact that, yes, I was surprised when I was asked to reverse mentor somebody, and pleasantly surprised, I might add. And my first encounter with reverse mentoring was probably, I'd say, close to 10 to 15 years ago. And it was through somebody that was in the organization that I happened to be working at. And it was a complete surprise, as I said, that they asked me to mentor them. And especially since I wasn't really that familiar with the concept, but I was absolutely delighted that they did so. And they were in a different part of the organization. They were on the engineering team, so not a team that I was working with on a daily basis. But nevertheless, I thought, well, how is this going to work out, especially since I don't have an engineering background? Yeah. But the experience was, if I were to rate it and value it, was incredible. And from that point on, I decided, okay, this is the way to go. And I was going to continuously look for opportunities to engage with others in terms of having them experience this concept either through me or introducing them to somebody else who I thought that they might be well partnered and suited with as a reverse mentor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how difficult it can be to obtain fresh perspectives, which is one of the benefits certainly to this concept. And then there's this other concept that economists call confirmation bias. And what it means for those that may not be familiar with the term is that we'll tend to lean towards information that's going to support our typical thinking versus a new approach, which is why reverse mentoring comes in handy, because chances are unlikely that the person that you're doing this reverse mentoring with is going to think the same way that you do. So it works out really well in that sense. And then the fact that reverse mentoring is also very powerful and beneficial and very practical as a concept. And I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind, and this is something that I'll cover a little bit later, is to make this concept work, you really have to be open-minded. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in terms of how do you know if you're open-minded, and give a tip in terms of how one would figure that out. And this is really critical when you're going to be taking a look at applying this. So Max, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. And how would you describe the initial process of getting started with the reverse mentoring? How did that go?
So that initially just started, honestly, with a question of, hey, I'd like to pay you for the coffee, for example, and it opened my eyes to the fact that somebody didn't know about something that I knew so much about without, honestly, thinking much of it.
Of course.
So I would say it started with the question and then led to more investigation on their side to figure out what it was, how you can use it, and just generally, the social aspect of it as well.
Of course. Give me another example of someone else that you had the experience of reverse mentoring with, perhaps at your current job.
Sure. So at my current company, there was one example where someone in the research department actually reached out to me, an older gentleman who didn't know how to use Twitter, actually. And really wasn't familiar with it, what it was used for, but was looking for a way to more socially engage an audience on topics of mental health in a anonymous fashion, but didn't know how to reach an audience, in a public sphere in that way, very broadly, like Twitter can, allow, just given that there's so many users on there. But that was probably the first instance in my my corporate setting.
Oh, that's a terrific example. Were there certain topics that you would recommend people focus on or not focus on, perhaps, when it comes to this area?
I think topics to probably avoid might be, it kind of depends on the individual, I think.
Okay.
But I think, any topic you should, if you're interested in it, you should pursue it, to some degree, and don't be afraid to ask any questions, because you might find out, that it might be a passion for you, or it could be something that ends up surprising you in a positive way.
That's great. Do you have any favorite aha moments from any of the conversations that you had?
I think, honestly, the conversation I had with the individual at my company was a good aha moment for myself, because it made me realize, honestly, I didn't know about all the capabilities on that platform as well. And just through the process of trying to explain it, what it does, it allowed me to go down a path of exploration that I probably wouldn't have gone on otherwise.
So one of the things that I'll mention is that when we have the opportunity to teach others, it reinforces what we already know and can sometimes showcase to us how much we've actually mastered a particular topic, which is a lot of fun, and also can perhaps identify some areas where we need to beef up on some of that information in the area of what we're talking about. But that's an excellent example. So I'm going to give some examples and some tips in terms of the ideal reverse mentor and how to go about finding them, and then also talk about some of the tips and benefits related to this process. So the first one is, ideally the candidate that you're working with should have, I would say, a minimum of at least a decade's worth more experience than you do, or in the reverse for that matter. And they don't have to be in your industry. If, in fact, it might be more to your advantage if they are not in your industry, because they're not going to be constrained by knowledge and thinking that is in alignment with how you would typically think things through. So they're going to definitely have some, what I like to express as out of the box, perhaps, suggestions for you that, because they're not ingrained in your day-to-day life at work, they're going to think very differently, and you can really benefit from that. I would also say that you're going to want to try to identify somebody or think about people that tend to be curious by nature. And the reason for that is because they're typically energized by asking other people questions. So you want to come about thinking towards having alignment with someone that has that characteristic. And then also another characteristic that's quite beneficial in terms of thinking through who could I find that would be an appropriate reverse mentor would be someone that's analytical, because they're definitely going to be giving you lots of different suggestions in terms of how you can go about coming up with solutions to challenges that you might have. And another one is to not be intimidated by the person's expertise. So if you think that perhaps having a CEO be your mentor and you're a first year or within 5 years into your career, great. I highly encourage people not to be intimidated by someone's level of expertise. If they say yes and are willing to help you, go for it. I think I applaud you. And then we talked a little bit about this already, but your expertise in considering pursuing somebody that has alternative expertise than yours, I just want to underscore that as an area to, also, you can consider talking to somebody that has the same level or the same field of expertise that you do, but again, try to go after somebody that's a much higher level than you are. So, Max, let's have you tell me a little bit about the reverse mentoring from your perspective. You've been through it a number of times. Are you looking at thinking about doing this again, or would you continue to do this?
I would. After the first experience, I thought it was really positive. And just the fact that I got so much out of it myself, I think that was one of my aha moments for myself personally. And just realizing that there's always more to learn, I just think that's very interesting. And, it's something that's even in front of you every day. You can always learn a little bit more about it. So I like that aspect of it. And because of that, I would pursue it again.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And was it intimidating to find somebody to go
honestly,
through that with?
No, because I was sought out by someone to reverse mentor on multiple occasions, and in that way, I feel like I'm a very social person. Easy to talk to. So I think it was a good experience for both parties. But I think the best part of choosing a reverse mentor would just be finding someone that you're comfortable with.
Yes.
But not comfortable enough where you're not willing to put yourself out there and maybe ask some tougher questions, or think that you might be asking any dumb questions, because that's certainly nothing you should worry about in that process.
Right, that's an excellent suggestion. And I have some more tips for people today. So people in their 20s and 30s typically grew up with technology. You cited working with your grandparents and helping to introduce them to Venmo, and also someone that you work with and teaching them about Twitter and how to benefit from that. And typically, people are not intimidated or as intimidated in those particular decades, whereas someone like myself, who didn't grow up with technology straight from the beginning of my career and had to evolve with it, we can sometimes be a little bit more intimidated with that. Some of my favorite technologies that I've really gotten a hang of, Venmo, of course, one of them, my favorite one out there. Love YouTube. Canva, Evernote, and Slack also. But you kind of take for granted that these are technologies that you use on a regular basis and don't even think twice about it. And I would say that, that's a huge advantage of working with your reverse mentor. I would say also having somebody that's younger than you opens up your mind to numerous potentials of how to tackle different challenges you would normally use and apply your tried and true methods of trying to come up with solving a challenge. So, and then they can typically pretty easily suggest ones for you to test out and try, and you could potentially even try them out on your reverse mentor as well, which is terrific. And then as we get older, this is a really strong point that I want to also emphasize here, is it's easy to get and become out of touch with the younger generations. So by having a reverse mentor, you're basically tapped into the generation or generations that you don't normally perhaps interface with, or that you can very easily ask them for suggestions and advice in terms of how they look at things. And again, that's going to be a huge advantage. And I would say that being in a situation and giving somebody who's younger than you an opportunity to reverse mentor you gives them both managerial and leadership experiences as well that they might not ordinarily have. And that's an enormous benefit for someone that may be an individual contributor, say, for example, and they haven't had an opportunity to flex and showcase their abilities, to show off the fact that they could in fact manage others, or that they have leadership characteristics. So I encourage people that are like in your decade to seek out a mentor also for that benefit. And then the thing that I also really like is the fact that for both parties, it can supply an additional amount of confidence for each party. And so I think that that's terrific because, let's face it, everyone needs an extra dose of confidence from time to time.
Absolutely.
So did any of the topics surprise you that you're asked to cover with the people that you've had the experience with?
I would say just because of my own assumptions that, I knew so much about it. I think just honestly, the question surprised me of what people didn't know. And it really made me reevaluate, what general knowledge really was in that case in terms of what people might assume something was made for or how it could be utilized.
So if you had to summarize and come up with, say, one or two benefits that you gained that you experienced through the process, what would they be?
I think the best part of that experience was honestly just realizing that not everybody's going to have your same level of knowledge on a topic, whether it's more or less. And I think it's beneficial to have that just so you can have empathy with people, or in a reverse setting, if I was reverse mentoring somebody else, you have more empathy on the person's maybe fear of asking the question, or their lack of knowledge, or any type of judgment.
Right. Okay. Excellent points. So I was kind of surprised myself by some of the questions that the reverse mentors asked me, and one of them was how to handle teenagers in working full time. And I didn't expect that because they weren't even close to thinking about having kids, but yet they were thinking that far ahead. So I thought that was fascinating that they would ask me that type of question. And of course, I love being able to answer it because I was in the thick of it at the particular time when they were asking, so it was very easy for me to respond to that. Another one was, how do I engage with my family members at home to get them to pull their weight at home, especially if you have little kids, and what you do with that. So these questions weren't necessarily attributed to questions that they were going to be dealing with at work per se, but they were questions that they were interested in and could benefit from the answers later on that applied to their personal lives. So I thought that that was really kind of fun that they felt comfortable enough to ask me those questions. And then another question that really I felt honored that they asked me this, because you're going to understand why when I tell you this, but they asked me, how is it that I always come across as never really seemingly being stressed, or that I always appear to be quite happy? And so I thought that was great, because I thought, wow, I must be hiding it really well. I must be a really good actress or something, because there are plenty of days where I'm very stressed and I may not be happy, but I'm not going to necessarily let somebody know. So through years of practice and training, I got quite good at that. And then I would say some of the main benefits that we touch upon are just seeing through another lens how somebody might provide insight to conundrums that you have, which is really terrific. The other thing that I'll say is that I didn't necessarily factor into consideration is the energy and enthusiasm and the willingness to take risks that my reverse mentors have shown me and that they've demonstrated. And I just thought that that was brilliant. And I was so excited that I was able to see these particular qualities come out in them, and just the energy is really captivating, and it's really something that is quite special that I didn't necessarily consider as part of the outcome. So one of the bonus tips is, and this is something that I mentioned earlier on during our conversation, was how do you know if you're open-minded? Because in fact, that's going to be one of the qualities that I would say to people that they should probably be if they're going to explore this as a concept for them. And I would say to consider whether in fact they would rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being fairly open-minded. If they're at least a 3, if they give themselves a 3, then I think that this is probably a good concept for them to consider pursuing. And so that's what I would say to them. I've been practicing this concept, although I said, it's only been maybe a couple decades. It's really been longer than that when I think back. I've been in the business world for over 25 years. So I probably more informally was doing something like this a lot longer ago than I'll give it credit. But I can't imagine not having done this and not pursuing it going forward. It's just something fantastic that I highly recommend everybody does. Any last thoughts as we wrap up on this topic, Max?
I just think that people should be totally open to the concept. Obviously gaining a new perspective on anything is always going to be a healthy exercise, and even refreshing your own perspective, could be a great thing for everybody, especially in a time where we're kind of stuck inside. So why not try to learn a little bit more with a little bit more free time?
Absolutely, without a doubt. So this was a lot of fun going through this process with you today. As I said earlier, I've been trying to get you into the studio for a long time, so it was great that we had an opportunity on a topic that made a lot of sense. Did a fantastic job today. I really appreciate you being my co-host today.
Thanks for
having me. Virtual fist bump on
Absolutely.
There. So thanks everybody today for joining us, and I look forward to you seeing many more of our shows that we'll be coming up with, and take care.